In the middle of tremendous darkness and personal tragedy, false lights are trying to guide us, and they can bring shipwreck. We must be focused on God's pathways and His light in the storms of life. Christ is the light of navigation. Hello and welcome to the Light of Navigation and the God Stories. My name is Marguerite Lever Woodall. I'm an author, speaker, and your host. I write short stories about real-life supernatural encounters with God, and I love to explore what it means to follow God's pathways. In this 17th episode of the God Stories, called God and the Favorite Photo, I'll share with you a powerful story about the lengths that Father God will go to comfort and lift us up in the midst of tragedy. Come and join me in the adventures of the God Stories and experience the encounters with the goodness of God, even in the middle of our life storms. I stood there and just stared at the large cedar chest at the foot of my bed that day. 2 years had passed now since my son's death. My former husband's grandfather had handcrafted 2 of the large chests for us when we were a young family. I was overwhelmed in those moments by a very stark realization. My husband and son are now gone. The legacy of the chest contents were meant to be passed on to my son. The tears came and I cried out, "Oh, Father God, what do I do with all the memories in this cedar chest?" I'd wanted to pass them on to my son and hopefully a future family of his own. It struck me now that all those memories held no value for anyone other than myself. What do you do with that? The scrapbooks in the cedar chest were full of events and memories of my husband and I and our son. They almost overflowed out of it. Our travels, our marriage, our son's birth, and the years following as he grew into a young man were carefully and lovingly recorded in each one. Every year I had put together a scrapbook of my son's life journey. There were photos of vacations and visits spent with my folks and family members. Baby blankets, baby shoes, and every scrap of import had been stored there, as only a mother can garner and keep about her kid. Birthdays, school events, proms, and graduation memories were included. I had made sure to keep pictures of every event in my son's life until I had moved and he left home. Love does that. Even all those random school homework papers were kept. You know, the ones with their very first attempts to draw pictures and letters in their first days of school. Several of my husband's things had also been set aside for my son at the time. He was 4 years old when his father died, and I had wanted him to know about some part of who his dad was. There were the carefully folded jackets and shirts, the wallet, the old aftershave, and the sunglasses, among other things. Some of the deepest pain came when I realized that no one would really truly value them in the future. The photos and mementos let others know that we mattered in this life, that we had a life story. Then it struck me that the life stories of the love in those photos and the value I held for them would mean nothing anymore, really, to anyone. We all want to be remembered and, more importantly, valued. To be remembered with fondness and deepest love by those we leave behind when we die. I would imagine my son sharing photos of me and his dad with his children in the future, saying, "This was my mom, your grandmother," or "This was my dad, your grandfather." With no other child to pass them on to, other family members probably couldn't care less about them. They didn't hold the deep personal meaning for them as they did for me. I don't blame them, after all. They have their own photos and mementos of life. A part of the legacy that we physically leave behind is in our photos and the trinkets we collect in the course of our lives. The contents of the cedar chest would not be passed down to my son now. He's gone. That realization was heartbreaking to me. The valuation of all those things would die with me. We are people who have lived, journeyed through life, and then suddenly we're gone. Will anyone care? I wanted in those moments for someone to care about this loss too. On the inside, I was screaming, will anyone remember that we were here? That our lives mattered? That we loved each other so much? The cedar chest sits there, and I cannot open it and go through all those memories. Not yet. Not for some time. As I was writing this story, the Lord spoke and gently reminded me about another aspect of our collected memories that we need to be aware of. I've observed in others' homes elaborate groupings of photographs for display, a collection of photos to remember that lost loved one. And certainly there's nothing wrong with remembering those we've loved and lost. But memorabilia can abound around us, and the various types of memorials to our loved ones too. I've occasionally seen a dedicated area or a memorial to a deceased loved one that reminded me more of a shrine or altar than a simple remembrance of someone gone. God's reminder was sharing with me that we can become imprisoned by this if we're not careful. God was warning me about an unintentional idolatry of the deceased. I know of a youth who had died in a small town, and consequently, a statue and small memorials of him went up in several places citywide. Friends and family mourned with the mother when the child passed after a long and brave battle with a devastating sickness. The memorials were given from a heart of compassion from the townspeople. It was a way for them to honor the child's life and to express their heartfelt grief alongside his mother. From a different perspective, however, it's as though these monuments do not let someone move on in life because of the constant visual reminders. These memorials bring to mind the child's life and death when you drive by. I have sensed that these reminders may contribute to some degree to the inability of the mother to release her child, to move on with her life into a greater plan that God has for her. On a more personal level, when the loved one left behind cannot move forward, everyone else takes a back seat to the memory and the memorializing of the deceased. It has tormented and wrecked many marriages when a child dies, when the marriage takes a back seat as a result and becomes less of a priority when it needs to be. I'm not throwing rocks here. However, I don't want the memory of my son and husband to lock me away from a future God has planned for me despite my losses. More importantly, I don't want it to distract me from my walk with God. I will grieve deeply for a time, knowing I am forever changed because they are gone. And then I must move on. My son's closest friends were putting together a photo and video presentation of his life for the funeral service that Saturday. These friends had accumulated a lot of pictures over the years of different adventures together that they had had with my son. Many I'd never seen. It was decided that family members speaking at the service would choose one favorite photo from the montage being created, and then a screen behind us would display it as we shared loving words of remembrance. Here it was, the night before the funeral itself, and I only had a small handful of photos that I had brought with me on my flight from Oklahoma. I had just grabbed some hastily in my state of shock. As I randomly picked from the topmost part of the cedar chest contents, I was not thinking about a possible video presentation. Truthfully, the pain of my son's death had numbed me to the point where I just didn't think about anything much beyond the moment. None of the photos presented to me in the montage stood out to me either. As I sat at the table that evening with my sister Mary and my best friend, I knew a decision had to be made about a photo for the service. It meant the world to me to just have the right picture. I was at a loss, and I truly wanted a photo that represented my best and deepest love for my son and how much he meant to me. As we sat there, my sister suddenly spoke up and said, "What about your favorite photo? You know, the one of Randall standing up in his crib in the morning when he was little." "What do you mean?" I asked. She proceeded to share with me about a visitation from God in a dream the night before. He had spoken to her directly and showed her my favorite photo that was in my cedar chest. I had completely forgotten about it in my shock and my grief. I was taken aback. How did she know that that was my most beloved photo and memory of my son? I'd never shared with her how much I loved that picture. Every mother has that one picture that is held close to her heart above all others among a lifetime of photographs. That particular image of my son was taken in the early morning when he was a small child. There he was, standing and looking out over his crib railing with his blue one-piece pajama suit on. His little face was beaming with an angelic smile that greeted me, with his hair standing on end, as I walked into his room and picked him up out of his crib. It was too late. It was the night before the funeral, and I certainly could not fly home to retrieve it in time. What I did not know was that Mary had already acted on the word from God and his instruction in her dream. She had asked a friend to go to my home and look through the cedar chest. The favorite photo had been secured and sent via a cell phone text. There it was, a mother's favorite photo to display as I spoke about my son at his funeral that Saturday. I was at a loss for words, impacted greatly by what God had done ahead of time for me. He had spoken to and directed my sister on my behalf in a dream. In the midst of the grief, I had struggled to remember even the little things, even that favorite photo. But God valued it and remembered it for me. What kind of God is this that knows what your favorite photo is? What God moves heaven and earth, speaking directly to someone to make sure you have what is needed at the right time and on the right day? What kind of God love is this that knows about and anticipates the choice of a heart's desire ahead of time when you yourself don't know about your own future need? I will never forget this small yet incredible move of God on my behalf. I hope I never stop being awed by this amazing facet of God's love. And the most wonderful thing of all, He had placed His valuation on my photos and memories by remembering them for me and brought my favorite photo of my son to me. The following day, that photo silently spoke volumes on that screen. It was about a mother's love for a child now gone and God's loving fulfillment of an unknown, unanticipated need. God valued my cedar chest photos, and I could also see that God became my memory when mine had failed me. Thank you for allowing me to share my story. If this podcast would be an encouragement for someone who needs to know just how much God values them, please pass it on. Your comments are valued and subscribing is also appreciated. You know, there's all kinds of victories. Some are immediate, others eventual. In the next episode of the God Stories called God and the Two-Step Victory, I'll share about what may have looked like a heartbreaking defeat, but would be an eventual victory.